In the middle of my son's birthday dinner, my daughter-in-law humiliated my wife in front of 30 guests and told her to leave her house. I didn't raise my voice or start a fight. I just stood up, took my wife's hand, and said one sentence that made the entire table go silent. There is a moment in every house fire, every real one, when the room decides what it's going to be. Firefighters call it flashover. 1 second you're standing in smoke, squinting, and the next, everything in the room that can burn does, all at once. No warning except the heat you should have been paying attention to the whole time. My son's dining room hit flashover at 8:19 on a Saturday night in July, somewhere between the cake and the coffee. 30 guests, grilled salmon going cold on abandoned plates, a chocolate cake with blue sugar letters sitting in the center of a 12-foot walnut table, and next to it, right where I had just set it down, a single folded piece of paper. Nobody was breathing. I'm fairly sure of that. 30 adults in cocktail attire, and the only sound in that big, beautiful house was the ice shifting in a water pitcher. My daughter-in-law stood at the head of the table with her chin still lifted from the last cruel thing she'd said to my wife. My son stared at the folded paper like it might catch fire on its own. In a way, it had been smoldering in my jacket pocket for 3 months, and I had just said the only sentence I planned to say all night. But that's the end of the story. Let me take you back to the beginning, so you understand why a 67-year-old retired firefighter stood up at a birthday dinner, said one quiet sentence, and then let the truth do what truth does. My name is Robert Miller. I'm 67, a retired Columbus firefighter. 31 years with the Division of Fire, most of them out of a station on the north side, the last 8 as a lieutenant. That job taught me one thing. Not every fire starts with smoke. Some start with a smile. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, wore that smile all night, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. Old habit. When you spend 3 decades running toward the worst moment of other people's lives, your brain files everything by the emergency and works backward. So, the beginning. My wife, Elaine, was a school librarian for 33 years. She is 65, reads 2 books a week, and has baked the same chocolate cake with mocha frosting every July since 1984, the summer our son Daniel turned one. 42 cakes. She could make it in her sleep. And 1 year with pneumonia, she basically did. When Danny was little, he used to run into her kitchen with muddy shoes and hug her around the waist while she frosted it, and she never once told him to take the shoes off first. That's the kind of mother she is. The kitchen was hers, but the kitchen was for him. Daniel grew up decent, played linebacker badly and trombone worse, got a business degree from Ohio State, became a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. Good job. Honest work. He called his mother every Sunday for 20 years, and every one of those calls, she used the name only she still used, Danny. Then, in 2017, he met Vanessa. I want to be fair here, because in these stories, the daughter-in-law always shows up with horns on, and that's not how it happened. The first time Daniel brought her to our house, she complimented Elaine's garden, asked me about the fire service like she meant it, and helped clear the table without being asked. She was polished in a way our family isn't. Pressed linen, good posture, a laugh she deployed like punctuation, but polished isn't a crime. Elaine hugged her at the door and told me she seemed lovely. The first red flag was so small I didn't even file it as one. At their wedding in 2018, a vineyard, string quartet, 200 guests, the photographer spent 45 minutes on family portraits. When the album arrived, Elaine appeared in 4 photos. 4. Vanessa's father was in 22. I counted because Elaine wouldn't, and then she said something I have never forgotten. It's her day, Robert. Brides forget things. I told myself she was right. That was the first time I told myself it was nothing. I want you to keep track of how many times I do that, because every one of them cost us something later. The second flag had a name, and its name was Frank. Frank Delgado, Vanessa's father, is a real estate agent with a golf tan and a handshake he practices. He's the kind of man who says, at the end of the day, 4 times per conversation, and calls every restaurant server boss. At the wedding, he gave a toast about closing the deal of a lifetime, and winked at my son like Daniel was a property that had finally moved off the market. People laughed. I laughed. Frank's whole trick is that you laugh first and think later. In 2020, Frank found the kids a house. That's how it was announced to us. Found like an archaeologist, like a hero. Off-market listing in Dublin. Brick colonial. 4,000 square feet. 3-car garage. $689,000. Daniel made good money, but he didn't make brick colonial in Dublin money, and I knew it because I'm his father and because I can do arithmetic. The night of the housewarming, I stood in that cavernous foyer under a chandelier the size of a satellite dish, and I did what I used to do walking into a structure. I read the load, mortgage, taxes, insurance, utilities on 4,000 square feet. I ran the numbers in my head the way I used to run hydrant pressures, and they didn't hold. Not on his salary. Not comfortably. Strange detail, noticed. Then came the rationalization. Right on schedule. Vanessa had her online boutique now, Maison Vie, home decor, and candles, and Frank kept saying it was scaling. Maybe it was. Maybe I was just an old man who thought a house should cost what our first one cost. I told myself it was nothing. Then came the evidence I was wrong to tell myself that. At that same housewarming, I watched my son laugh at one of Frank's jokes, and the laugh never got anywhere near his eyes. I've seen that exact expression before, on home homeowners standing on their own lawns at 2 a.m., watching us vent their roof. It's the face of a man calculating what's still savable. My stomach did a slow roll, standing there with a glass of wine I didn't want. Physical reaction, right on schedule too. So I attempted a fix. A week later, I took Daniel to a rib place on Sawmill Road, just the two of us. And over a rack of ribs, I asked him plainly if the house was too much. He looked at his plate for 1 second too long, then he grinned, and the grin was his mother's, which made it worse. "We're fine, Dad. Vanessa's business is taking off. Frank structured the whole thing. He does this for a living. Frank structured the whole thing." Remember that sentence? I didn't, not for 2 more years, and I've thought about that every day since. Here's what living beyond your means looks like from the outside, in case you've never watched it happen to someone you love. It looks fantastic. That's the whole point of it. Between 2020 and 2024, my son's life turned into a brochure. Vanessa leased a white Range Rover. The backyard got a pergola, then an outdoor kitchen, then a landscape lighting system that could guide aircraft. Maison V threw launch events with charcuterie boards the size of doors. Vanessa's Instagram, Elaine showed me. I don't have Instagram, I have a rain gauge. Was all cream and beige and captions about intentional living. And in 2022, they tore out the kitchen. I want to sit on this detail for a second because God has a sense of humor, and it's darker than people think. The kitchen was fine. It was a nice kitchen. But Vanessa wanted a chef's kitchen that flows, so they gutted it to the studs. Quartz waterfall island, a range that cost more than my first car. Cabinets with no visible handles anywhere, which I maintain is a war crime. The renovation was supposed to cost $40,000 and cost $63,000. You know how they paid for it? So do I now. A cash-out refinance in the fall of 2022, arranged by a mortgage broker Frank golfs with. They gave up the 3% interest rate they'd locked in 2020, gave it up voluntarily, and walked out with $85,000 in cash and a new rate of 6.9%. Their monthly payment went up by over $1,100 forever so that the kitchen could flow. $63,000 went to the kitchen. You're going to want to know where the other 22 went, plus quite a bit more besides. Hold that thought. Frank's holding it too. I didn't know any of those numbers at the time. What I knew was smaller and stranger. Strange detail. Daniel started working Saturdays. A sales manager, salaried plus commission, suddenly catching up on paperwork every weekend. Strange detail. He lost weight. The wrong kind. The gray kind. Strange detail. At Thanksgiving 2024, his phone sat face down next to his plate and buzzed 9 times during dinner. And every time, a muscle in his jaw jumped like a wire under load. I rationalized every bit of it. Sales is stressful. The economy's weird. Men his age run themselves ragged. I did too. I told myself it was nothing. 31 years of walking into buildings taught me exactly what nothing smells like. That wasn't nothing. Meanwhile, and this is the part that still heats the back of my neck, Vanessa's treatment of my wife was going through its own renovation. It happened in coats of paint, thin enough that each one could be explained away. Coat 1, corrections. Elaine would bring her famous dinner rolls to a holiday, and Vanessa would set them on the counter, out of reach, so they don't crowd the spread. Elaine's gifts started getting returned. A hand-knit throw came back in January with a smile. "It doesn't really go, but it was so sweet of you." Coat 2, the vocabulary. Somewhere around 2023, Vanessa discovered the word boundaries, the way some people discover a gym, which is to say she used it constantly and only on other people. Elaine calling on Sunday became a lot. Elaine dropping off soup when Daniel had the flu became just showing up. The word for a grandmother-in-waiting who loves your husband apparently is enmeshed. Vanessa had a podcast for every occasion. Coat 3, the erasing. This one Elaine never mentioned, not once, so I'll mention it forever. At gatherings in that big house, family photos rotated through a digital frame in the hallway. Over about a year, we watched ourselves fade out of it. Wedding photos with us cropped tighter and tighter. Then holidays with Frank and his wife only. Then, finally, a slideshow of Vanessa's brand shoots, cream and beige, no people at all. Elaine swallowed all of it and kept smiling. And if you ask why, you've never been a mother whose only child's marriage sits in her hands like a bird. She took it because she loves her son. That's what mothers do. They take it, and the people doing the dishing start to believe the supply of grace is infinite and free. Me? I stayed quiet too, but not for the same reason. I stayed quiet because by the spring of 2025, I knew something that would have knocked every candle off every charcuterie board in that house. And the story of how I found out starts with a credit card that wouldn't run. February 2025, a Tuesday. I took Daniel to lunch at a diner near his office. My treat was the plan, but he grabbed the check the way he'd started doing, a little too fast, like paying was a fitness test. The server ran his card, came back apologetic, ran it again, came back worse. "Chips cracked," Daniel said, laughing, ears going red the exact way they did when he was 9, and I caught him hiding a math test in the garage. It's been doing this all week. I paid cash and said nothing. My hand, I noticed, was not entirely steady putting the bills down, which annoyed me. 31 years of fires and a visa declined at a diner is what gets my hands moving. Attempted rationalization. Cards fail. Chips crack. It happens. 3 weeks later, he called me, which by then was rare enough to notice, and asked asked to borrow $800 for a transmission sensor on the Accord. Now, I know what a transmission sensor costs because I've owned Hondas my whole life, and the number is not $800. I sent it anyway, same day. He paid back $300 in April and then went quiet about it, and my son has never in his adult life gone quiet about owing anybody anything. He was the kid who mailed his college roommate $11 for pizza, evidence stacking up, stomach dropping accordingly. Then came the mail. First week of April, I drove over to drop off a drill he'd asked to borrow. Pergola maintenance. The pergola always needed something. Nobody home. I let myself into the entryway with the code, set the drill down, and there on the entry table sat the mail pile. I wasn't snooping. I want that on the record. The pile was 8 inches tall and avalanching, and on top, face up, sat a certified mail slip, the pink kind, second notice, and under it an envelope with a corner I recognized, because at 67 you've seen every kind of envelope a bank sends, and you know the weight class on site. Thick paper, blue logo, the words Loss Mitigation Department, showing in the little cellophane window like a fin above the water. I stood in my son's foyer, under that satellite dish chandelier, and I felt the whole house differently. Every finish, every fixture. You ever stand in a building and feel it being heavy? That. I told myself, one last time, the record for most expensive sentence in my personal history, that it was probably refinance paperwork. Banks send scary-looking mail about routine things all the time. Failed fix number 2. I texted him that night. Call me when you get a minute. He sent back a thumbs up. No call. A thumbs up. I raised that boy and he sent me the emoji you send a coworker. 8 days later, at 11:40 on a rainy Tuesday night, headlights swung into our driveway and just stayed there. Engine off. Nobody got out. Elaine was asleep. I stood at the window in my socks and watched my 41-year-old son sit in his Honda in the rain for 11 minutes. And I knew, the way you know a ceiling's coming down before it comes down, that the fire had finally shown itself. I put on coffee and opened the door before he could knock. He sat at our kitchen table, his mother's table, the one he did homework on, and he put his hands around the mug like it was January. And my son, who I have seen calm at funerals, came apart in units. Not all at once, in units. Here is what came out over about an hour, in no particular order, because shame doesn't organize. They were 5 months behind on the mortgage. The payment had jumped after the refinance, $4,860 a month with taxes and insurance, and Maison V, which was supposed to cover the difference, had never once been profitable. Not one quarter. It lost money the way a hole loses water. When I asked how much, he said he didn't exactly know, and that answer scared me more than any number could have. The bank had filed an actual foreclosure complaint. Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. His name and Vanessa's on a public docket any neighbor could search. He'd gotten a reinstatement, quote, $31,650 in certified funds, 5 months of payments, late fees, the bank's attorney costs, or the machinery kept grinding toward a sheriff's sale, and the $22,000 left over from the cash-out refi gone into a hole with a name. Frank had brought Daniel an opportunity, a duplex flip in Grove City through something called Ridgeline Property Group LLC. Family rate, ground floor. At the end of the day, Danny, real estate is the only real money. My son wired $40,000 total into it over 2 years, the refi cash and more besides, and the project had been in permitting for 18 months. When Daniel asked for it back, Frank clapped him on the shoulder and said the money wasn't gone, it was illiquid, which is what gone says on its resume. Does Vanessa know? I asked. The pause told me the truth, and then his mouth told me a softer version. She knew things were tight. She did not know about the filing. Her father had told her the market was slow and everything was handled. She was at that moment planning a catered party. Does your mother know any of this? No. God, no. Dad, please. Please. She can't. His hands were shaking hard enough that coffee went over the rim, and he didn't notice, and I watched my son's hands shake at his mother's table and understood that I was going to pay it. I'd known since the driveway, probably, but I am my own father's son, so what I said out loud was, I'm not writing a check tonight. Tomorrow we do this right. Right had a name, and her name was Carol Jennings. Carol is an estate and elder law attorney in Worthington, 31 years in practice. She handled my father's probate in 2009, a small, tangled mess she untangled without ever once making us feel small, and she has a way of taking off her reading glasses that functions as a complete sentence. Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, Daniel and I sat across her desk and I laid it out, and Carol listened with her hands folded, and when I finished, she took off the glasses. Robert, you can rescue the house. You cannot gift the rescue. She let that sit. We don't do gifts here. We do instruments. If your money goes into that property, it goes in documented, secured, and on the record because you are 67, because Elaine's retirement lives in the same accounts, and because, and here she looked at my son, not unkindly, marriages in financial distress have outcomes nobody in this room controls. So we built it right. A promissory note, $31,750, 3% simple interest, repayment terms spelled out, secured by a junior lien, a second mortgage on the Dublin house, recorded with the Franklin County Recorder's Office, behind the bank but ahead of nothing and nobody else. Carol used words like arriérage and reinstatement and perfected security interest, and every term landed like a handrail. This is what I mean when I tell young guys at the station, calm isn't a mood, it's a procedure. And then Carol added the condition that turned out to matter more than all the paper. She slid a legal pad across the desk to Daniel. Before Mr. Miller funds anything, I want 18 months of statements, all accounts. My office works with a forensic accountant, Dale Prusak, CPA, certified in financial forensics, 26 years, ex-IRS, flat fee. If your father is putting retirement money into this household, he is entitled to know what this household actually is. Daniel signed the consent without a word. I think, honestly, some part of him was relieved. Secrets are heavy, and he'd been carrying his up a hill for 2 years. Dale Prusak turned out to be a compact, cheerful man with a handshake like a C-clamp, and 9 days later, the four of us sat in Carol's conference room while he walked us through a stack of tabbed folders he'd labeled like exhibits. A, B, C. I'll never forget that detail. Exhibits, like it was already a trial. In a way it was. The courtroom just hadn't been built yet. It was being catered. Exhibit A, Maison V. Net loss of $3,400 over the trailing 12 months. This is not a business, Dale said without cruelty, tapping the page. This is a subscription. Exhibit B, The Wires. $40,000 in 4 transfers to Ridgeline Property Group LLC. Registered agent, Frank Delgado. No operating agreement in Daniel's possession. No recorded deed in Ridgeline's name on any Grove City parcel Dale could locate. Carol wrote something on her pad, and her pen pressed hard enough that I heard it. Exhibit C, The Spending. I won't inventory my daughter-in-law's credit card statements for you because it's beneath all of us, and because the shape matters more than the items. The shape was a household performing a life it could not afford, month after month, with the discipline of a metronome. And Exhibit D, Dale saved it. And I understand why, because Dale has a showman's streak under the short-sleeve dress shirt. Exhibit D was the closing disclosure from the 2022 refinance, the loan that jacked their payment and lit the fuse. Line by line, standard fees, standard numbers, and then one line item Dale had highlighted in yellow, $3,200, paid at closing, for marketing consulting services, payable to the brokerage where Frank hangs his license. The room went quiet. Carol took her glasses all the way off. So he got paid, I said, on the loan that's drowning them, his own daughter. That, Carol said carefully, is what the document indicates. It is also the kind of undisclosed compensation the Division of Real Estate takes an interest in. File it away, Robert. She looked at me over the folder. File it away. I filed it away. On April 17th, I walked into a bank branch on Sawmill Road with a cashier's check for $31,650. The loss mitigation officer assigned to the file was a man named Marcus Webb, 22 years at the bank, glass office, tie the color of a filing cabinet, and he processed the reinstatement with the bedside manner of a man who has watched 100 families do this walk. He shook my hand at the end and said the file would show current by midnight and that the dismissal of the court case would follow, and then he said something bankers probably aren't supposed to say. They're lucky to have you. Most of these files don't end with a father and a windbreaker. The confirmation letter arrived at my house on April 24th. Reinstatement processed. Loan current. Case dismissed. 1 page, folded in thirds. I read it twice and put it in the inside pocket of my good gray jacket, and I could not for the life of me tell you why I didn't file it with Carol's folders. Maybe part of me knew. In the parking lot after the bank, I gave my son the only condition that was mine and not Carol's. I kept my voice level because level is the only volume I've got that works. 30 days. You sit your wife down and you tell her everything. The filing, the note, the lien, all of it. And then you tell your mother because she does not get protected from the truth of a family she built. 30 days, Daniel, or I do it for you. He hugged me in that parking lot, hard, the way he used to with the muddy shoes, and he said, I promise, Dad. 30 days came and went. 60. There was always a reason. Vanessa's spring launch, Vanessa's birthday. Things are actually good right now, Dad. I don't want to blow it up. I let it slide, and I want to be honest with you about why, because this is the part of the story where I stopped being the hero of it for a while. I told myself I was being patient. Patience, it turns out, is sometimes just fear wearing a nicer jacket. I did not want to be the man who detonated his son's marriage. So I carried the letter, and I carried the secret past my wife every single morning. And if you think that didn't cost anything, you've never eaten breakfast across from a librarian. Elaine reads everything, including me. Twice that June, she asked if I was sleeping all right. Then, first week of July, the invitation arrived. Actual engraved cardstock for a family birthday dinner. Join us at home, catered, 6:30 sharp. Regrets only, catered, for the son of a woman who had baked him 41 straight birthday cakes. Elaine read the card, and she was quiet for a second, and then she smiled and said, well, I'm still making the cake, and got out the good cocoa. 42 years of cakes. She wasn't going to let a caterer end the streak. I went upstairs and took my good gray jacket out of the closet. Saturday, July 12th, 6:30 sharp. It was my son Daniel's 42nd birthday. 30 guests around one long table, grilled salmon, white wine, neighbors, a couple of Daniel's college friends, Vanessa's Pilates circle in linen, Frank and his wife Diane, caterers in black aprons moving through a kitchen that cost $63,000 $10,000 borrowed dollars and flowed, I suppose, beautifully. And a chocolate cake my wife, Elaine, baked from scratch, the way she had every year of his life, riding in on her lap in a carrier she's owned since the Reagan administration. Vanessa floated through the rooms in cream silk like she was hosting a charity gala, and every time Elaine tried to help, Vanessa corrected her. The plates were in the wrong cabinet. The salad bowl was too old-fashioned. The candles Elaine picked out were cheap-looking. Each correction came wrapped in a little laugh, so that objecting to it would have made Elaine the difficult one. That's the technique. I've watched arson investigators trace slower burns with less craft. When Elaine offered to warm her famous dinner rolls, Vanessa waved her off. The caterer has it handled, sweetie. Sweetie. Like my wife was some confused old woman who had wandered in off the street. Then Vanessa sat Elaine at the far end of the table, past the neighbors, past her college friends. The last chair by the kitchen door, where the servers brushed her shoulder every time they passed. I watched my wife pull that chair out herself because nobody offered, and something behind my sternum went very still and very focused, the way it used to when the tones dropped at 3 a.m. Elaine swallowed every insult and kept smiling. That's what mothers do. They take it because they love their sons. Me? I stayed quiet too, but not for the same reason. 3 months earlier, I had walked into a bank and made a payment. A big one. The letter confirming it was still folded in my jacket pocket. I don't know why I wore that jacket to dinner. Maybe part of me knew. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa tapped her glass and gave a toast about the beautiful home we built together. She actually said that. Built together. Her father, Frank, real estate agent, golf tan, clapped the loudest, and why wouldn't he? $3,200 of that beautiful home had landed in his brokerage's account. I touched the letter in my pocket and said nothing. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes all night. Now I know why. 60 days past his deadline, sitting at the head of a table he hadn't paid for in almost a year, listening to his wife thank herself for it. Then Elaine brought out the cake. Mocha frosting, Daniel's favorite. And on top, in blue sugar letters, "Happy birthday, Danny," the name only she still used. For 1 second, my son looked like the little boy who used to run into our kitchen with muddy shoes and hug her waist. I watched it move across his face. Whatever happened after, I wanted on the record that for 1 second my son remembered exactly who loved him first. Then Vanessa laughed. "Danny," she said, loud enough for the whole table. "Elaine, he is a grown man. This is exactly why boundaries are necessary." The room went quiet. Elaine's fingers tightened on the cake plate. Vanessa wasn't done. She raised her voice like she was giving a speech. Her friends leaned in. Frank swirled his wine and smirked. "Actually, since we are all here, maybe this is a good time to say it," Vanessa announced. "I am tired of you walking into my house and acting like you still run this family." Elaine went pale. "Vanessa, I was only trying to—" "No," Vanessa snapped. "You were trying to remind everyone that you are the mother. But this is my house, my kitchen, my family, and honestly, I think you should leave." A fork clattered against a plate. Somebody coughed. 30 people suddenly found their napkins fascinating, and my son Daniel, the boy we raised, stared down at the table, silent, not one word for the woman who baked his cake. Frank chuckled into his glass. "Well," he murmured, "somebody had to say it." Elaine's hands were shaking. She set down the cake she had spent all afternoon making. In a kitchen she was no longer welcome in. In a house well, you already understand, but nobody else at that table did. That was the thing humming in the room that only 3 of us could hear. I looked at my wife's trembling fingers. I looked at my son's lowered eyes. I felt that letter against my chest, patient, waiting. I did not yell. I did not argue. 30 years of walking into burning buildings teaches you something. Panic never saved anyone. Calm does. So I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I took Elaine's hand and pushed in my chair, and the scrape of wood was the loudest sound in that house. Vanessa lifted her chin like she had already won. "Finally," she said. "Some respect." I smiled at her. Then I reached into my jacket, took out the folded bank letter, and set it down in the middle of the table, right beside the birthday cake. "Of course we'll leave, right after Daniel tells everyone whose money kept this house from being taken by the bank." 8:19 p.m. Flashover. Here is what total silence sounds like in a 4,000 square foot house. It sounds like ice shifting in a pitcher. It sounds like a caterer freezing in a doorway with a tray of coffee cups and deciding wisely to reverse. It sounds like 30 people not looking at a folded piece of paper so hard that the paper becomes the only thing in the room. Vanessa laughed. One note. It came out alone and died alone. "I'm sorry." "What?" Nobody answered her. So she reached out, and I'll give her this. She didn't hesitate, and she picked up the letter and unfolded it, and I watched my daughter-in-law read a loss mitigation department's reinstatement confirmation in front of her entire social circle, in cream silk, under her own chandelier. You could see it land in stages, the bank's logo, the words, the amount. Her eyes went back up to the top and made the trip again, slower, like the second lap would change the route. "This is—" Her voice had lost all its speech-giving. "Daniel, what is this?" And my son lifted his head finally and looked at his wife and then at his mother down at the end of the table by the kitchen door, and he said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 15, "It's true." "What's true?" Frank was up now, buttoning his blazer, deploying the handshake voice. "Everyone, this is obviously a private financial matter that— We were in foreclosure, Ness." Daniel didn't raise his voice either. Turns out he's my son. 5 months behind. There was a court case. It's public record, anyone can look it up. Dad paid $31,650 in April so the bank wouldn't take the house. There's a promissory note. There's a lien. He's not a guest here. He looked down the table at Elaine, and his voice went to pieces on the landing. Neither is Mom. That's impossible, Vanessa said. Daddy said, and then she stopped, because the sentence had nowhere good to go, and 30 people watched her hear it herself. Daddy said. Frank put his glass down. Sweetheart, the market has been... The market. I said it evenly, the way you'd read a gauge. Frank, would you like to tell your daughter about Ridgeline Property Group? The $40,000 of her equity that's been in permitting in Grove City for a year and a half? I let that sit for exactly one breath. Or the $3,200 consulting fee your brokerage collected on the refinance that put their payment up $1,100 a month? I have the closing disclosure. My attorney has it too. It's Exhibit D. I'd be glad to have her send you a copy on letterhead. I have seen a lot of faces do a lot of things. I had never before watched a golf tan fail. Frank sat down without deciding to, the way a building sits down, and Diane, his wife, moved her chair 3 inches away from his. 3 inches. And everyone saw it. And 3 inches was somehow the loudest thing anyone did all night. One of the Pilates friends reached quietly for her clutch. You did this in front of everyone, Vanessa said to me, and her voice was shaking now and the mask wasn't off. It had just stopped fitting. You planned this. No, I said. I carried a letter for 3 months and hoped I'd never have to open it. You planned a speech. I picked up Elaine's cake carrier from the sideboard. 3 months ago, this was a private matter in a bank drawer. Tonight, you stood up in front of 30 people and evicted my wife from a house my retirement fund is holding up. All I did was finish your toast. Elaine hadn't said a word through any of it. She stood, and she looked at nobody but Daniel and my wife, 33 years a librarian, a woman who has never once raised her voice in my presence, said the quietest, worst thing said in that house all night. You let me stand in your kitchen like a stranger, and you knew. Then she took my hand, and we walked out past the caterers, and the last thing I heard before the door was nobody. Nobody saying anything at all. The drive home was 11 minutes. Elaine looked out the window for 9 of them. $31,650, she said finally. Plus interest. There's a note. Carol did it right. 3 months, Robert. Not angry. Worse. Level. You sat across from me for 3 months. I know. We don't do that. Whatever else happens in this family, you and I don't do that. I know it, I said. And I did. And I'll be honest with you the way I had to be honest with her. Saving your son's house is one decision, and deciding your wife can't be trusted with the truth is a second one. And I'd made the second one without ever admitting it had been made. It took a while to earn that back. It should have. She let me start the next morning. Over coffee, which is more grace than I had coming. But then, I'd married the woman who never once mentioned the photo album. The fallout came in waves, the way it does. Daniel showed up on our porch the next evening, alone, and sat in the same kitchen chair as the rainy Tuesday, and apologized to his mother for 45 minutes. And to his credit, he did not once use the word but. Elaine let him finish. Then she cut him a slice of the birthday cake. We'd carried it home. She said she wasn't leaving 42 years of streak in that house, and she slid the plate across and said, "Happy birthday, Danny." And my son put his head down on his arms at his mother's table and cried like the 15-year-old, and she put her hand in his hair, and I went out to the garage because a man deserves one witness fewer for that. Vanessa left for her parents' place in Powell that same weekend. In August, Daniel filed. No children, the one mercy in all of it. So it moved the way these things move when the numbers are already on the table. Lawyers, disclosures, a settlement conference. It was final this past spring. I'm told her attorney raised the question of the house's equity, and then read Carol's paperwork and stopped raising it. A perfected lien, it turns out, is a very calming document. The house sold in September. 11 days on the market. Dublin is Dublin. At closing, the title company issued a check that repaid the note in full. $31,650 plus $409 in interest. Daniel wanted to round it up. Carol told him the number is the number. That's the point of numbers. And Exhibit D went exactly where Carol said it might. Her office forwarded the closing disclosure to the Ohio Division of Real Estate and Professional Licensing in August. The process took months, the way processes do. This winter, Frank signed a consent agreement, undisclosed compensation, a fine and a 90-day suspension of his license. No headline, no handcuffs, nothing cinematic, just a public record with his name on it. In a database his golf buddies know exactly how to search. He tells people he's stepping back to spend more time with family. Fewer of them ask which family. Ridgeline coughed up 18 of Daniel's $40,000 after a demand letter, in installments. The rest is a lesson, priced accordingly. Vanessa, I hear, moved to Cincinnati and rebooted the brand under a new name. I don't follow it. I don't wish her ruin, and I want to be careful to say that plainly, because this story isn't a revenge fantasy. Nothing that happened to her or her father came out of my pocket except the truth. I just no longer mistake silk for armor, and neither does anyone who was at that table. 2 weeks ago, my son turned 43. 8 of us this time, in our backyard in Clintonville. A picnic table plus a card table, seams hidden under one of Elaine's tablecloths, burgers I didn't let anybody else touch. Daniel came early. He has a condo 10 minutes away now, sees a counselor on Thursdays, calls his mother Sundays like the clock never stopped. stopped, and he took the trash out without being asked, and stood at the sink afterward washing dishes in his mother's kitchen with his sleeves rolled up, and Elaine dried, and I sat on the back step listening to the two of them argue about whether the Reds are actually any good, and I thought, there it is, that's the whole estate. Everything I ever meant to leave anybody was standing at that sink. The cake had mocha frosting, blue sugar letters, happy birthday, Danny. Nobody corrected her. The bank letter lives in a folder now. In a file box, Carol's office labeled, between the note marked paid and a closing statement. I took it out once this summer and looked at it. One page, folded in thirds, soft at the creases from 3 months against my chest. And then I put it back, because it did its job and retired, same as me. 31 years of fires taught me most of what I know. The last one taught me the rest. Not every fire starts with smoke. Some start with a smile. And the quiet ones, the ones that start with a smile, you don't put those out with water, or with shouting, or with a scene. You put them out with a folded piece of paper, a steady hand, and the patience to wait for the exact right moment to open.